to introduce some key people, some of whom you may or may not have met before, but we do have a new director of Transport and Highways with us, and that's Rose, and I'll introduce Rose in just a moment. From myself, I just wanted to make a few opening comments. Many of you have been working really, really hard in the background and working on projects and schemes over recent months. And I know that a number of you have been quite actively involved in the Active Travel Forum as well as the STTF. And I think over the last few months, there's been quite a number of changes in the council, and I would say a sort of a bit of a refocus of what transport and highways are there to achieve. And Rose will say more about that in a moment. I think initially we were approached by a number of you on this call today, including Garfield, who has kindly agreed to be our vice chair, to actually consider the way forward and consider the role of the Active Travel Forum as well as the STTF. And so that's why we have arrived at the position that we're in today, where the decision has been sort of taken in consultation with some of you to amalgamate the two groups. Now, I don't want to say too much more about that because I would like to give the key officers and also Garfield an opportunity to address you first of all. So may I just start by introducing to you Rose MacArthur, who is our newly appointed Director of Transport and Highways. Rose, over to you.
Lovely. Thanks ever so much, Karen. Hello, everybody. Some of you I know, some of you I don't. So thanks very much for that introduction. And I can't tell you how excited I am about this meeting today. It's been long awaited for everybody, I think. And thank you for bearing with us and having that patience while we just, reevaluated and came back to you with what we hope is a really attractive and strong proposition about how we work collaboratively going forward together within this particular discipline. I'm so excited not only just to be in this meeting, but also to be with Cheshire West and Chester. It's where I started my career many years ago and realised that transport was just a thing I couldn't get enough of and wanted to pursue as a career. So I'm happy to be back here, really, really happy. My background is in actually strategic and integrated transport, heavily kind of biased towards the sustainability angle of things and sustainable travel behaviour change. I won't go too much into some of the past projects, but I'm an interesting choice for Cheshire West and Chester because my background isn't that sort of, formal highways. And I think that's been a very, very conscious decision by them. So, yeah, it's an absolute massive privilege to have taken on this role. So it's an interesting time to be in transport, isn't it? I don't think it's ever been a headline issue as much as it is at the moment, whether that be infrastructure or the ILP or funding or active travels, buses, you name it, and the decarbonisation and the net zero agenda. I won't talk too much about that because I know that's one of Garfield's sort of, main points of interest in this and one of his big directions for this group. You'll have noticed that we've made that subtle change to the title to call it Integrated Sustainable Transport Task Force, although it's a bit of a mouthful. It's actually really, really important that we actually do look at that whole integrated piece within this group and think about how we join up the borough to make sustainable travel accessible and interesting and a desirable way to travel for everybody across the borough. It's not only an interesting time to be in transport for the positive reasons, but also there's a lot of challenges here at the moment. Funding is even more hotly contested. You'll have seen from the recent comprehensive spending review that places like Liverpool and the mayoral regions very, very well within the space of active travel and sustainable travel, but other places sort of around that area, such as ourselves, didn't quite receive those same settlements. So we're having to do more with less constantly within this particular field. So it's a challenging time to be in, but as they say, the symbol for chaos is the same as the symbol for opportunity, and I really want to kind of use that as an opportunity to make sure that we are seizing every single opportunity from every single challenge that's put in our path. As well as all of that we're ambitious within Cheshire West and Chester, and I know you all know that because you've been with us on this journey for a very long time. And that ambition is absolutely prevalent in with every officer, with every division and within this new directorate. there's a very subtle change to the title of our directorate, and we're actually not highways and transport, we're transport and highways. And as subtle as that seems, that's really, really important to give you an idea about where our priorities are and what we want to major on going forward, which is that integrated, systematic, profiled and prioritised strategic transport planning that needs to kind of be at the heart and the start of everything that we do. This is a critical group for me. Your efforts, I hope and I hope you've seen the appreciation for the time, effort and energy that you've spent on the scheme so far that have been brought forward or brought to my attention and brought as part of this group. We have had to look at what the terms of reference are, and we've got that to talk about later on today. We have had to consider what the group's purpose was. We have had to consider a little bit about the value that you bring, because what we don't want you to feel is that what you've given so far hasn't been appreciated because it hasn't been taken forward. But I think what we need to do and what we have done and what we want to discuss with you today is taking that step back and a kind of a refocusing and a reconsidering of how we can actually deliver things together that are affordable, that are deliverable and that are realistic. And I think that's a different lens that we potentially have to see this group through. And that's why Councillor Shaw, myself, Garfield and Christy today want to kind of have that led discussion with you to kind of work out what we want this group to be and how we can work collaboratively going forward. So you're a critical group for me and you're a critical group for Cheshire West and Chester. I think that's probably more than enough from me, but I just wanted to really kind of reiterate and re-emphasize that this is, it's a really, really exciting hour and a half that we've been very much looking forward to. And I hope now that we are looking forward and looking forward to all of those opportunities that we can bring forward together to create that really integrated, sustainable transport system that we need across our borough. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Rose, and thank you for those words too. And obviously, I certainly echo as well the appreciation for all the time and effort that people have put in so far. And we want to look forward and move forward together towards what we hope will be, as Rose has said, opportunities as well as challenges. I'm just going to hand over now, if I may, to Garfield, who, as I said before, has kindly agreed to be the vice chair. And Garfield and I felt that it was really important that he was still having a very important and key role to play. So I'll hand over to Garfield for a few words. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and welcome, Rose. Thanks very much. You bring a fascinating background, and I'm really looking forward to working with you, but also seeing the effect that you can have on the county as a whole, transport-wise. I think everybody who's on the call today is so keen, is so, if you like, tied up with the notion of where we can go transport-wise, that you're assured of all the support you need in order to move those agendas forward. So welcome. I put a few notes together because we come from an interesting joint background of the ATF and the STTF, and I just thought I'd like to just put a little bit of context in place so that colleagues on the call who were in those groups, but also who weren't and may wonder why we've done this, can just kind of get a bit of perspective on it. The original STTF was, and I think correctly in my view, set up as an independent group to look initially at the travel lane issue, which was causing so much of a problem at the time, and also to identify areas where improvements could be made throughout the borough to the sustainable transport portfolio. The 5 working groups that the STTF set up clearly demonstrated that we've got a large pool of people who are keen to help, a large pool of people who've got incredible expertise in their own areas, and we can use these key skills to move that sustainability agenda forward. However, the independent nature of that group did lead to the problem of what I might call validation. Could the schemes suggested by the working groups be accepted by the council? We needed some kind of joint working team. This independence, if you like, kept us away from that input. And we needed a joint working team to look at the ideas and suggest changes that would improve their chance of acceptance by the council. and we needed some kind of interface, and that came in the form of Kevin Riley, who acts as an interface between the old STTF and the relevant council teams, and that was very welcome. But these discussions moved slowly, and it became clear that the independence of the STTF was now working against it. And if we really wanted to move forward, we really needed a much closer collaboration, and that was needed from the start. And that was something that the ATF did very well. They were always on the theme, they knew where they were going and new ideas were coming up, whereas we felt as if we had to kind of fight with our ideas in order to get acceptance. So there was clearly something here that needed sorting. So a merger was suggested from several avenues. I found on attendance to a few of the ATF meetings that they were covering similar ground that we were covering, and similar detail, which I'll come back to in a moment. So the merger was suggested, and after wide discussions, this new group has been created, which on the surface appears to combine the aspirations of both groups. I've still got a few concerns, and I'm sure these will be addressed as we go forward. I'm concerned that the ATF side, if you like, of the group will continue to focus on the local and the important but relatively small matters that affect them in the areas that the people are representing. But we really need to be looking at the borough-wide implementation of national agendas, such as EV charging. And many of you on the STTF will remember that presentation that we had from York. It would be good to see that kind of thing moving forward. Decarbonisation of transport, which Rose has mentioned, is really very high on my agenda, coming from that background at the University of Chester. Transport hubs and the work that Andy Farrell's done in his superb report, that really needs bringing to the fore, and their location needs discussing and working through. And freight movement. And we really do need to try and get more and more of our freight moving on rail and various other ways so that we can keep things off the road and keep these big diesels from moving around. So there are many areas which really we do need to be looking at. So the balance of what we concentrate on within this team is crucial, and how we get that right. How do we develop these major schemes? Clearly there isn't time or necessarily the expertise directly within the ISTT to do that, or maybe even the council don't have this expertise. So subgroups may be one suggestion which harness the expertise as required, so we can look at these big agenda items and have experts coming in order to look at the best way to deal with these. More hard-hitting than I think that we could achieve in the STTF. We need external bodies to help create ideas and schemes which from the outset are developed in accordance with the council requirements. And this last point is crucial. The council must need what we're doing. It must own it. And each particular project must be fully supported by the council from the outset. Otherwise, we'll be back to where we were with the STTF. I really welcome these new terms of reference, and I think they move us a long way to addressing some of the issues we identified in the STTF. The joint co-production of ideas, the recognition of the skills of our wider group. That's very important. We identified perhaps a team of 60 or so people who've got expertise in certain areas when we were with the STTF, and there are volunteer people who can come together and help sort these problems out. And I welcome the suggestion of the 3 subgroups outlined as well under section 4. So in closing then, the group we are founding today could not have been created without the solid work of both the ATF and the STTF, but it's not a straight amalgamation. It's much more than the sum of its parts. And I think the terms of reference make that clear, but also I think your contributions as a team will help us to do that as well. So thanks very much for coming today.
Thank you, Garfield, and I think we will be opening up discussion in a number of the items that follow, but I just would like to, before we move on to that, introduce Christy Littler. For those of you who have never met Christy before, and those of you who have, Christy, you're very welcome. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi everybody, I'm Christy Littler. I'm Transport Manager at Cheshire West and Chester Council, so working on the strategy side of things, and obviously within this group as well. Obviously some of the things that Garfield mentioned as well, we've got borough-wide initiatives, and we've got more initiatives that are maybe more focused focused on a more localised area. So the group obviously needs to explore those. And one of the things I'd probably put in front of you and might put in the chat in the future is the National Bus Strategy. So we've just published our bus service improvement plan. It's obviously subject to further review by government and funding to deliver those initiatives, but obviously really interesting because we've got various different transport nuances across the borough, if I can put it that way. So I'll put that in the chat, but I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. I can see that we are still receiving people into the meeting, but we'll make some progress if we may. One of the things that's been represented very, very strongly is the feeling that people had about an update and conclusion on some of the schemes that you've been working on. So we've put that as the first item on the agenda to give some updates and some feedback on. And perhaps if I hand over to Christy and to Rose, we can then have some discussion to follow. Thank you.
Fab. Thanks, Karen. Okay, so this has been an interesting one. Trying to get a full and proper update that might satisfy the people within this call today on all of the brilliant ideas and conversations that happened as part of the two groups. I got a note from Kevin that sort of summarised the walkabouts that he'd had with you, the walkthroughs and some of the ideas and schemes being put on the table. Now, some of those haven't gone any further because they've stayed as a conversation, they stayed as some ideas. But what I'll start with are some of the ones that we have been able to kind of, that have been taken forward and have become a little bit more solid and have got a little bit more sort of reflection for me to come back to you on. So I'll start with the Mini Holland because I think that was kind of the one that got the furthest, wasn't it? So that went to the government as an expression of interest. And unfortunately, having chased, probably better not disclose how many times I've chased the DFT for an update on that. I haven't received anything concrete back. So we haven't got a yes, but we haven't got a no. Now, we've got a DFT liaison manager, and he's an absolutely fantastic guy. So there's no subterfuge with any of this. It's literally with the heat of the comprehensive spending review from the Department for Transport's perspective, everything else took a back seat. So we're actually waiting for the decisions on quite a few things. Now, I actually raised this with him in a joint tag call, which was Warrington and Cheshire East and ourselves. And I thought, we were being poorly treated not having got the results of Mini Holland back, which was submitted over the summer. And one of our colleagues from one of our neighbouring authorities who I said, well, I've been waiting for 2 years for a response on one project. So I felt slightly better about the fact of the time lag that we'd had there. However, I am still chasing, and I've managed to now find a time in the diary with not only our DFT liaison officer, but a gentleman called John Sweetman, a gentleman called Richard Mace, and a gentleman called Grant Gahagan, who are the 3 active travel leads across the DFT. So they are taking this seriously. They have listened to our concerns, and we've got an hour-long meeting with the DFT at the beginning of December. On that agenda, we've got a request for the Mini Holland update, but we've also got an update. We've asked for an update in terms of the tranche 3 funding, where that's up to, when we're likely to hear, and what the next steps are with that. I've also got on our list of things to follow up with them. Where we go next with the what were the emergency active travel lanes that were brought in under the experimental orders, what are our options there, what's the DFT's position on that? So that's on there too. In terms of other updates to give to you, GP prescribing, I don't know whether you're aware of this. It's a really interesting collaboration between the Department for Transport and the Public Health England, and they've come together to say, right, obviously cycling and walking benefits people in a myriad of different ways, but what if it was prescribed by a GP? I'm sure that I'm telling you things that you already know here. We put in a bid with our public health team and we found out that we'd got down to the last round. So we had to resubmit further documentation, we had to show collaborative working, we had to give ideas of where we'd have pilots, what that would involve. But if you think, for example, a GP would prescribe a guided walk with a ranger around a park in Ellesmere Port, for example, or the GP would prescribe a cycling proficiency lesson and then a guided cycle ride with a ranger, so that someone could actually learn how to ride a bike and then to confidently ride a bike and then to actually start to use that cycling as a commute, as opposed to just for health and well-being reasons. It's a real grassroots program, but my goodness me, the benefits are seen for years and years and years to come, and they've got the public health benefit as well as a congestion relief and the whole kind of health and well-being angle. So that was a joint partnership bid between Christie's team and our public health team. So we're waiting on the results of that, but you know, I read the, you know, the end product that went in, and I felt very proud actually, but I felt very confident as well about kind of the quality of the submission for that one. So that's on the list of updates there. We've taken the LC whip out for sense check. I might ask Christy probably to give a bit more detail about that, but I know that there was some feedback from the group about kind of the strength of our LC whip, our local cycling and walking implementation plan. Was it fit for purpose? Did it do the right things? Was it ambitious enough? So we've actually kind of got that out to market at the moment to do a bit of a strength test on. I don't know whether Christy, you want to come in at all with any further detail on that one.
Thanks, Rose. Just to say, as Rose says, that there is a brief out at the moment. Obviously, we had the collaborative approach through the Active Travel Forum, where we tried to, you know, take on board people's views and groups to work together to develop what we thought was a good local cycle and walking infrastructure plan at the time. But government have obviously since then we've had gear change, and then we've had changes to the guidance that DfT put forward for any new infrastructure that's going forward, LTM 120, and that wasn't around at the time that we did the LC whip. So what we've put out to market at the moment is to try and do a sense check of that. Are the routes still viable? Could LTM 120 be, you know, applied to them? Are they still logical? And what the barriers might be for those pieces of infrastructure going forward. We did a piece during the LC whip to sort of prioritise them. Is that prioritisation still right in terms of the government's agenda, and also, you know, some of the constraints that might be on site that might mean that we'd have to, you know, change the programme. So that's out to market at the moment, and we're just reviewing the briefs that have come forward. So no real update other than that at this point in time, but we will keep you updated on that when we know more.
I think the main things kind of we're waiting for across the piece here is funding opportunities, because that's where the real opportunity lies. It's where is government going to put its money next? Where are those challenge funds going to be? What competitions are going to be released out to market where Active Travel, walking, cycling and integrated transport are concerned? So that's why the list is kind of as it is today. The BSIP, the work that Christy was talking about before, which is the bus service improvement plan. Sorry, I know it's a combination of those words. Keep getting the wrong order. This is a hugely ambitious piece of work that's been put forward. You know, Karen's been sort of intimately involved in this right from the beginning. It's gone through cabinet. It's a really ambitious ask of Cheshire West. It's a £38 million funding request. Baroness de Vere sort of said to us, you know, be ambitious, ask, you know, be grand and be bold, and really think about this as a landmark and transformational change for what your bus service provision is across your county. Tie it into the Rural Mobility Fund, tie it into demand responsive transport, tie it into all of the things that you need to address as inequalities that you need to address across your borough. Look at your public transport accessibility levels, look at that connectivity to modal hubs like your train stations, and really put something forward that kind of, you know, unites and brings that, like you know, I suppose the actual that real integration. How can bus be that really integrated mode? So lots of work went into that, and that, like I said, that was a £38 million ask, and that went in on the 31st of October. So again, that will go through the next rounds of conversation, and we hope to hear about that soon. And then the other update to give you is on the Satan Camp Section 106 monies. I think this is more, I know that this is sort of more for the South East Chester area, but actually we've been working sort of closely on trying to within our team working close on what we think might be the best approach to the use of those monies, and where we think the best way of looking at that and applying a methodology is actually if we look at and the evidence-based approach of identifying where our problems are first before moving towards that point of the solution. There's a very structured framework that we want to use here, which is travel demand management. And I know Kenny's on the call, which is lovely to have. So Kenny from Cheshire Oaks, and it's something that he and the council work quite closely on, which is actually looking at all of the data that surrounds somewhere about where the issues are, when they are, on what mode, what kind of trip purpose, what audience. And really kind of unpicking the problem first before moving on to developing what we call a core narrative, which is what do we want to change, what do we want to introduce, and then using the 3 pillars of capacity creation, network management and behaviour change to then work out what your solutions are, and then you pass those solutions through a weighted metrics to kind of get you out at the other side into a prioritised, implementable, funded group of schemes. And that really sort of fits very well with how we consider our schemes, which is with ambition. Are they achievable? Are they affordable? Are they deliverable? And that will kind of be the frame within which we try to then look at what those solutions for the Satan Camp specifically are. So not all of those are related to what the either ATF or STTF considered sort of in detail, but they are the kind of the live opportunities that we've got. This is the live conversation that we've got where they are real, they are funded potentially, they are deliverable, they're achievable, but I think that they show great ambition too. So I thought it was worth sort of today, instead of maybe reflecting on things that have gone and haven't come forward, reflecting on what we actually have got and what we could work together on developing, and also an LTP rewrite. That's a local transport plan rewrite is on the horizon as well, and the DfT are about to publish new guidance as to how LTPs need to be written going forward. So that's a huge body of work. I recognise, Karen, that I've talked quite a lot, and this is meant to be very much a two-way conversation, so apologies about that. I don't want to make it all just about us telling you things.
Sure, thank you, Rose. I just wondered, before I open up for questions and discussion, if you would just sort of give us a little bit more information about the refresh that you referred to for the local transport plans, and also a plea not to use acronyms, because not everybody knows what they are.
Sorry. I know, and you know what, when I first started in this job, it's exactly what I asked my highways team. I was like, I'm not sure of these acronyms, so my apologies. So the LTP is the local transport plan, and it's kind of a 10-year vision, sometimes longer, for the council, that kind of frames our priorities. It tells us where we are and where we want to get to. It'll be very, very important to kind of look at that from a net zero perspective. And the DfT have issued, the DfT haven't issued, but the DfT have hinted that they will be producing quite different and quite specific guidance for how local authorities produce their local transport plans going forward. We don't have timeframes for that at the moment, and we'll wait to hear. But I think that's the really big one, Karen. That's a really big opportunity for this group.
Thanks, Rose. And just to add as well, as we move forward, obviously rail plays its part as well, and that's very topical at the moment, the integrated rail plan. And I'm sure, I know that some of you have a particular interest in rail. Seems to be some background noise. I'm actually, is anyone else struggling to hear, or is it just me? Is everybody on mute? That's better. Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions, comments, discussion, and the first person with their hand up is Andy F. I think that's Andy Farrell. Is that right?
Yeah, that's me.
Hi, Andy.
Hi, everyone. I guess Rose referred to it. I mean, it's not just an update from the council, it's an update on everything we're doing as well, presumably. And I presume the next item is to go into the terms of reference, which I know the bid has some comments on. But in terms of where we are, the smart mobility, the Chester Smart Mobility work, which was done by, for want of a better word, Garfield's group, was reported to the Chester Growth Partnership on Friday, and they agreed it as input into the production of the One City Plan review. So that's kind of running down the line and is with the council and its growth partnership in terms of the consideration of which elements of that will be taken forward. Okay.
Thank you, Andy. That's really helpful. I'm going to bring Stephen Hughes in.
Hi, thank you, Karen. Thank you, Rose, for the update. Well, the one comment I'd like to make is around, I guess, I've been through the terms of reference very lightly, so I'm sure there's some references in there to the public relations element of it. And I know, Rose, you mentioned the project around the GP prescribing. I think that projects that are focused not just on infrastructure, not just things actually on the ground, but huge public relations projects that influence behaviour change should be right up the top of the list. And I'm not sure there was a list of things that you mentioned there, Rose, and behaviour change came at the bottom of the list. I hope that wasn't in order of priority, and that that should be no, yeah. And I know from your background and the conversations that we've had separately, Rose, that that it's a big thing for you. But I hope that we can, consider big projects that aren't just infrastructure moving forward as well. I think that would be really key to the work that we all do here.
I think, Stephen, if I may just come back very quickly, Chair, absolutely. And I'm really sorry that we didn't make that way more explicit at the beginning, Stephen, but no, this it's absolutely the focus of this group is about opportunities. It's about behaviour change. It's about seismic shifts that we need to see. Definitely not just about infrastructure. Sorry, I should have made that a lot clearer. Thanks.
And that's something we do have a little bit of funding for as well, Rose, isn't it? We've got some revenue funding for that. So there's a note in the chat, if I may just pick it up, from Donna, who has requested that speakers introduce who they are just on this first meeting, because not everybody knows everybody. So Stephen, if you want to just briefly say a little bit about yourself for those people who haven't met you before.
Yes, I'm muted? It wasn't seeming to work then. Yes, so sorry. I'm a chemist by background, but I'm here representing the Chester Sustainability Forum, which I chair. So yes, Chester Sustainability Forum is what I'm representing.
And Andy, could you also do the same? Andy Farrell.
Yeah, I'm Andy Farrell. I run my own consultancy, Andy Farrell Limited, formerly Executive Director for Chester City, and after that, Strategic Director, Executive Director, Deputy Chief Executive of Warrington Borough Council. I represent the Chester bid and the Chester Growth Partnership.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can I bring in Stephen Perry?
Thanks, Karen. Stephen Perry. I'm a very active member of the Chester Cycling Campaign, and in that capacity was an active member of the Active Travel Forum, and then represented the Active Travel Forum in the Sustainable Transport Task Force, and in particular looked at the travel lane issue. I'm very supportive of what we're trying to do, Rose, and I think we all need to give you and your team time to settle in. But I feel I also have to say that I think that those that have been involved in the various initiatives so far in both groups, but I'm thinking particularly in the Sustainable Transport Task Force group, I think we need a bit more of a detailed feedback than you've just given. What you've given, I appreciate. Somehow we have to feel as a hope that's not me. We have to feel there's a sort of either a moving on or a closing down. And I think that those that were involved up to the midsummer were expecting perhaps a more detailed feedback, particularly from Kevin, or through yourself from Kevin. And how we get that feedback, we can perhaps discuss offline. But what I have in mind is that clearly the 3 or 4 things you mentioned are going to progress, and hopefully with some degree of success. But we have to, in a gentle way, close down other initiatives that have generated expectations and perhaps feedback to people why they're not going to work. That's put a demand on your team. But I just think that management of the link between what has been and what will be is really quite important. Thank you.
Absolutely. Sorry, Chair, if I may just very quickly come back. Yeah, Stephen, I know that you and I have spoken, and I recognise and probably have understated the the input across the group. And I wasn't sort of trying to close off, there's no update. I do have a note from Kevin that I received with some sort of detailed breakdown of what the schemes were and what was put into them. But what I haven't had a chance to do yet is sit down with the team and kind of look against our sort of funded priorities and where our funding is going to be coming from, and actually kind of assess what that looks like. But I think you're absolutely right. If you could not bear with us, but acknowledge that we're absolutely not shutting it down. We do need to reflect on what's happened in the past and do need to work out where that goes going forward. It was just being able to give you a little bit more of the kind of, active kind of updates on things that actually are going forward, but without forgetting what's been put in so far. So I think if you give me a little minute to reflect on that, Stephen, I can probably come back to the group in a much more meaningful way on the schemes that I've got some understanding of. So rather than sort of just read out the note from Kevin, let me reflect on that and let me see how we meaningfully come back to you on it.
Okay, well, and again, I don't think it has to be done now, and if we can help in that process, but I think it's something we just have to manage in the timescale that we can. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for those really, really important comments, Stephen. And and I echo what Rose has said about that. And I know that there are still some projects that are in the pipeline that further work is being done on to assess, and we're not quite there yet. So that doesn't at all mean that they've gone away. It just means there's more to do. Okay, I've got Martin Beecroft next. Martin, if you could introduce yourself, I'd be grateful.
Hello, yes, Martin Beecroft. I'm chairman of Little Lee Parish Council. This is my first meeting with you. Nice to meet you all. And I'm very new to all this, but I'm just really putting a bit of a plea in at this point to say that there is a feeling in some of the smaller rural communities within the borough, Little Lee being one of them, and I'm sure there are others, that we seem very much on the outside of all this, and yet we are, as a small group, very interested in developing active travel within our area. We have a bit of a disconnect here because we're virtually cut off from our local services, shops, medical services, etc., by virtue of our geography and surrounding roads, which basically precludes the ability for most people to be able to use active travel, walking or cycling to these services, which means that we're filling our environment with pollution, driving our cars. So it's just really a plea that please don't forget the small communities in developing these plans. We actually did submit an active travel assessment document to various councillors and departments at Craig. I don't know how far it got. The response has been pretty poor, which again just emphasises the fact that we do feel rather left out in these small communities. So hopefully this new group is one of the vehicles we can use to actually get the message out to the local communities that they're not forgotten. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. And I know that there is currently work underway on the Rural Mobility Fund. I'm not quite sure in whether that will cover your geography without checking, but I don't know if Christy can perhaps comment on that at the present time.
The Rural Mobility Fund is around the sort of Frodsham Helsby geography, but what I would say is that depending on the outcome that we get from government on the bus service improvement plan and how we sort of put those plans into practice, we will obviously be looking to improve connectivity and accessibility within rural areas and taking those hopefully positive messages that we learn from the Rural Mobility Fund and replicating those across the borough where we can, and that might not be that there's a bus service between 7 and 7 from morning to evening, but it might be that there's better connectivity with rural stations or to interchanges and things like that. So all those different aspects need to be unpicked and reviewed, really.
And again, that's an opportunity for this group, isn't it, when we know the outcome of that. And it was a key plank of the BSIP to accessibility for rural communities in particular. So we'll await the outcome of that, which I think there's going to be announced around the time of the comprehensive spending review, but we haven't been given a clear steer on that yet. Is that correct, Rose?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
another one that's sort of in the pipeline for being released, but I'll add it to my list of, even though I'm talking to 80 active travel people, I will ask the DFT, who our bus contact is there, to see if I can push that decision along a bit, or at least find out where it is. And Martin, that's a really important point to bring to the group, and it's kind of why those terms of reference were rewritten, because the whole integrated sustainable transport task force is not just about urban centres and one mode. It's about looking at what our rural issues are and how to create better connectivity for them. And I think there's so much happens at the local level within the communities, within your places like Little Lee. There's so much community spirit and that grassroots activism almost of a type, and it's where the best ideas come from. So we're really grateful that you're on the group, and really looking forward to working with you to kind of bring ideas forward for the smaller, more rural groups that you're bringing to the table.
Yes, well, I thank you for that, and I look forward to working with you all. It's just making sure that everything is integrated. For example, the new bus routes, we haven't had a bus route in Little Lee for a while. Our nearest is in Barnton, but we don't have the ability to actually get into Barnton safely. So it's things like that that I'd like to raise and go, move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin.
Thanks, Martin. I've got 4 more people with their hands up, and then I think we'll move on to discuss the terms of reference. And we've got Steve Densley. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Steve Densley. I'm the Operations Manager for Active Cheshire. I'm also the Strategic Lead for Active Environments, or Active Design as it used to be. So we're very much involved with transport infrastructure, looking at ways of getting people active, natural capital, that sort of thing. We really want to push ourselves forward as a resource for this group, particularly for Rose and Christy in terms of reviewing documents. We've just taken the step of approaching Sport England for additional funding for a dedicated research, data and insight role within the business, because we've come to the conclusion that data is absolutely key. Some of you who are aware of us from historically may know that we did a lot of research 4 or 5 years ago, and we looked at Cheshire, and we determined the areas of social deprivation, health inequalities, and identified those key places. That data is now out of date. Things have changed, things have moved on. So what our goal as part of this data insight is to find out where we need to be active, where we can make the most difference, with input to the natural capital audit, which has already created a heat map to show where interventions can create the most impact in terms of climate change. As you can imagine, the first point on the agenda for that was climate change, but the second point was health and well-being. So with the right data, we can join those dots, and with the right data, when we're making funding applications, it carries much more weight if we've got that real grassroots data there. We don't know whether we're going to get the funding from Sport England. If we don't, we're going to build this into our own business model, because it is absolutely vitally important to know what we're doing is the right thing. We're doing it in the right places, impacting the right people and having the right outcomes, and then analysing those outcomes and learning from it. So our aim is to be the sort of data warehouse, if you like, for Cheshire and Warrington, so we can bring all that information together. So when we're asking questions in forums such as this as well, shall we do this? Shall we intervene here? What projects should we go with? We can actually come in with the actual data, the metrics, the analytics to say, yes, this is going to have more impact on the right people than Project B will have. So that's our position going forward. So we're here to help, and that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Wow, that's amazing, Steve. Sorry, Karen, jumping in there.
No, carry on.
Phenomenal. Oh my gosh, I'm so grateful that you're on this group, Steve. That was a brilliant introduction to what you did within a couple of minutes. And anyone who sort of knows me and the approach I take to this is everyone, in God we trust, everyone else brings data. I think it was the disgraced Mayor of New York that said that, but it's still something that I do think of often, and get the facts then react is another good one. And it just keeps bringing you centrally back to where, you know, the data that this should be based on, because that's what makes it sustainable. And I don't mean even from an environmental perspective, I mean in usage, I mean in patronage, I mean in that whole behaviour change that you want to bring about. I mean, Steve, what might be really interesting to you as well is to know we've got an I&I group, the Data and Insights group in Cheshire West and Chester, and had long conversation with them about what data they hold, how it's represented, how it's manipulated, you know, how it's sort of shown back. So I think there's some really good connections for your group with the I&I team within Cheshire West and Chester to actually, you know, cross-tabulate that to really help us be laser focused with the schemes that go forward. And what you're actually talking about is almost like green book business case work, planning work that we have to do for any scheme like this. It's not based purely on roads or desire lines. It's actually levels of deprivation, public transport accessibility levels, health and well-being issues, obesity. All of these things are what build up the government's criteria for where we can put schemes and what we do. So it's a very healthy approach, and one we're fully supportive of, and it's great to have you on this team.
Thank you.
Absolutely, I second that, Rose. It's great to have you here, Steve, and thanks for your comments. I'd like to bring Mike Garrett in. Mike, if you're there.
Yeah, hi, thank you very much, Chair. I'm a freight consultant. As a little company, we're effectively the national freight, road and rail forecasters. So I know a little bit about the DFT and Network Rail and so forth. I'd like to endorse what Stephen Perry was just saying about the need to pick up on the work already done. And on the last speaker's point about data, of course, the use we made of the data from that we procured through the local authority from MOTS, of course, on the origin destination data, all of that. However, my question really was, or my point really was, that you talked, Rose, a lot about funding from the DFT effectively. I think it's also really important, back to what the previous speaker was saying as well, to think about what can be done without that, because otherwise you're a prisoner to every passing government fad and being, as it were, flavour of the moment, the fashion of whatever, and that may or may not suit the requirements of an individual authority. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope you saw me nodding vigorously there and putting my head in my hands for a second, Mike, which wasn't about what you were saying. It was just the situation that we're in from a funding perspective, and agreed wholeheartedly with your observations. And you're right. And there was something in the chat, actually, I think from our friends in Crag. Is that Tony, John and Vanessa? I think you'd put something in the chat there, hadn't you, about actually if we want to bring forward, you know, non-bus or non-car related schemes, you know, where are we looking for further capital that's outside of that centralised DFT part? I think, is that what you were sort of making almost the same point that Mike?
Yes, can you hear me, Rose?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, I think Mike did pick up that point, and I was really grateful because I do admire the drive for getting funding, particularly on the bigger infrastructure projects. But you know, every time, I'm just a simple person, every time I go down to London, I probably cycle about 15 or 20 miles on an Uber bike, constantly stopping, undoing it, getting back on it again. I know it's a really busy place and I don't think they've got adequate cycle lanes, but my God, people use them. And I keep wondering, is this not a neat thing that you could do quite quickly that requires no funding, and in fact would bring funding that you could maybe even capitalize into some of the more, you know, capital projects? You could use the income stream from it to fund capital that you could then build infrastructure modifications with. So if you look at the cost of, for example, making that Grosvenor Bridge into a, you know, a more acceptable thoroughfare for cyclists than it is at the moment. I mean, maybe the money you get from mobility schemes like cycling, you can put into, you know, into that. I mean, I'm a layperson, you guys are experts at all of this stuff, but my God, I'd love to go to Lidl shopping on an e-bike than getting my car and take 20 kilos of shopping in my car. If I could, if there was a bike at the end of my road, I'd just I'd do what I do in London and just take it, you know?
Yeah. Don't worry. You're. I think the perception that you come with. I don't know whether you're Tony or John, and I'm not thinking
Tony.
of Vanessa. Okay, but Tony, I think that you're making me smile because that's it's where I think I've got my shortcoming so far in the role is that it's been quite a lot to take in terms of what the funding sources are, the competitions you have to go through, what are those sort of formal channels, because that's where the big bulk of money comes for, big infrastructure projects that kind of create quite a big step change. But what I haven't explored and what I need to work more closely with Christy and David and the rest of the team on is thinking outside of the box, to use a silly expression. It's actually identifying those alternative funding schemes and actually what's self-funding. And it's interesting because the EV market has captured this. So our EV strategy isn't something that we're necessarily funding. It's actually being funded by the providers of the infrastructure who will release capital, who will actually get revenue eventually, but they're going to help us strategically put them in the right places because they end up benefiting from it. And it's that same shared mobility platform you're talking about, whether it's e-bikes or Santander cycles that you see in London, actually sponsors, providers, and almost like third avenue funding schemes, isn't it?
And the only reason for saying this, Rose, is primarily that the council and all of these groups, they sometimes get a bad name because things don't happen, and I understand why things don't happen, because a lot of them are based on funding that may or may not arise, and you've got a bunch of people working jolly hard to try and make things happen. And I'm thinking, well, in parallel, can you focus on some things that you could make happen within your own capabilities that don't require any external funding? Therefore, you always have a win at the end that says, yes, we were trying for that, but at the same time, we still managed to do this, this, and this that were in our capability curtilage. Yeah.
I think you're getting you're trending in the chat at the moment, Tony, because I think there's a lot of people agreeing with you, and the ginger scooters are absolutely. I was going to say to Christy, I've just done a slide for a staff presentation I've got later about how many trips have actually been made, and how many is it, Christy? I mean, even I nearly fell off my chair with it. But how many scooters have we got? How many trips? Totally put you on the spot now.
I've lost count now, to be perfectly honest, but the numbers have grown and the number of spaces have grown. I'll put it in the chat when I've just done a bit of investigation. Bear with me.
And I know that Andy Farrell will have his hand up at this point, because I think some of that Smarter Mobility, report that you came back with, is trying to capture that circular economy and that shared economy, especially with our university students that we've got. They don't want to own anything. They just want to have access to something, and it just needs to get them from A to B. They don't think about transport in the same way that we have or have. We do or have. And there's a whole brilliant bodies of thought around all of this sort of shared mobility concepts, mobility hubs, what you do and where, and it moves us away from that infrastructure conversation, which is actually the longer term piece to come in, get the people, don't build it and they'll come, actually get the people cycling, and then and then do your desire lines afterwards when you've got that patronage.
Look, I can say to you now, having looked at a city like Jakarta and worked there, and you think to yourself, it's the most congested city I've ever worked in. And yet once a month, they close the inner ring road on one side and allow everyone in that city to cycle on a Sunday morning from 10 o'clock in the morning until midday. And then they take the cones away, and the traffic resumes. And you cannot believe the number of people who would never, ever cycle in Jakarta. You've got probably 10 or 15,000 people and their families all cycling on a Sunday morning once a month. And you think, my God, we could do that ourselves even with the inner city ring road and get people out on the road and not be frightened about getting on a bike and cycling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a bit passionate about this, but
yeah, I mean, my name was mentioned. The thing for me is we don't have to reinvent the wheel here.
Yeah.
There was a group of us in the Sustainable Transport Group that came up with a plan like that for Chester. It just needs delivering, and that doesn't, to a large degree, depend on government money.
Correct.
It's about the vision for your city, basically. And neither is it just a job for the transport team. We can be in a bit of a transport bubble, can't we, really? whereas, you know, the regeneration and planning team will deliver half of this, you know. So there's a need to join up here. And, you know, perhaps one of the things you start with is changing some of your planning policies, you know. You get far more people, for example, living in your city centre if you change your planning policies, and particularly your car parking, your residential car parking standards. And you wouldn't need a penny to do that. You'd probably get money in to do it, actually. But anyway, we're getting into the terms of reference. When are we getting into that, Karen?
Well, I'm just going to take 2 more comments, if I may, because people have been waiting patiently, and then we'll move on to terms of reference item 3. So can I take Francis Tunney and then Catherine Holcroft, and then I have to close the discussion on this item. Francis. Francis, are you muted? Can't hear you. Oh dear. Do you want to try coming back in, coming out and coming back in? Okay, Catherine.
Hiya. Yeah, so I'm Catherine Holcroft and I work for Living Streets, which is the charity for everyday walking. I'm familiar with quite a few people in this group. I'm head of major projects, but I also live in Neston as well. So so I do have a local interest too. Yeah, my thoughts really were similar to what just been mentioned, and you know, it's about the partnership working. And I know that, you know, you're like the transport team, but within Cheshire West itself, do you work very closely with the public health team, for example? Because, you know, a lot of this will be very joined up. And I suppose it's making sure that different departments aren't working in silo for similar aims, and to make sure that there's a good cross-representative, you know, across those departments that are within these groups, just to make things happen, really.
Yeah.
Go on, Rose. I was going to say yes, absolutely. And it was actually the public health team who helped to set up the Active Travel Forum that preceded this meeting. So I think there's been a lot of collaboration on various projects, but absolutely take the point about not working in silos, Catherine. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I don't know whether when you managed to join the call, Kevin, but we actually, one of the things we're waiting to hear back on is that GP prescribing, which is a joint funding, a joint venture with our public health and transport teams. So looking at health and well-being as a result of, you know, more active travel. And actually, I'm talking at the moment with our commissioning team about how we can actually help young adults to become more independent, and actually commission public transport or walking and cycling as a way of getting them to places for education, for health, for care, for leisure, and actually prescribing different types of transport to get them to have that social, to have like a strength-based approach to being active and also independent. So I work very closely with my fellow directors like Gemma Davis, Graham Pink, and Maria Byrne, who look after the respective other directorates. And so it's all well and good having great plans, but they've all got to be a great plan together. And we have a lot of conversation about that at our DMTs, which are directorate meetings, about how we best collaborate and cross-pollinate to bring the best social outcomes. So it's the hottest topic there is at the moment, is that cross collaboration.
Okay, that's really good to know. And I just add on to that, I'm also the DFT liaison for our organisation, so I have regular updates with them, but they're different contacts than you seem to have. So
yeah, and that's just the
active. Anything.
Yeah, Helen Corkery is another great one, because she's obviously ex-Living Streets and DFT. I'm sure you know her.
I know.
Yeah, she's our Bus Back Better team lead now. So the DFT is like it's revolving very fast in terms of personnel moving. But yeah, and anyone you think would be good for us to liaise with, Catherine, do let us know.
Okay, will do.
Thanks, Catherine. I think we've got Francis Tunney back with us, and Francis will be our last speaker, and hopefully it will work for you, Francis. Francis? I can see he's in the meeting. Francis, did you say in the chat you were going to email myself or Christy? Yeah, okay. I think we'll have to take that as I'm sorry that the technology didn't work. If you'd like to get in touch with us, we'd be happy to consider your email. Sorry. Okay. I think we're going to move on to terms of reference now. Item 3. I'm not sure who's leading this, Christy. Is that yourself or Rose? I don't mind. It might be helpful for people if one of you are able, perhaps Jess, are able to share screen on it so people can see the terms of reference.
Okay, I'll just pull it up now.
So you're right to start us off on this one.
Okay. So yeah, we've developed some terms of reference for the group, and we obviously have them in draft form at this point in time. I'm really interested to hear your views on those. Obviously, we've mentioned that the group is joining the forces of both the is that showing now, the Active Travel Forum and the Sustainable Transport Task Force group, but we realised that we weren't hitting everyone's boxes, as it were, in terms of the scope and the shape of that meeting. So what we've tried to do is put together a group, hence why you're here today, that will reflect the needs more effectively, so that the right opportunities that come forward, they reflect council policies and strategies and funding, and we can maximise the opportunities going forward. As Rose says, we've called it the Integrated Sustainable Transport Task Force Group because, you know, integration is key to anything that we're trying to achieve going forward. Apologies, I can see some hands up. I don't know whether they're before I start, if that's gonna, are they, or should I carry on?
Our hand up is just for afterwards.
So carry on.
Okay.
Carry on.
Apologies. So that feedback then, I guess that is okay. All right. So what we've said for the remit of the group is that we want to, so apologies, so the background is in section 2. In section 3, we cover the remit of the group. So, you know, we're saying that we're responsible for identification, development and delivery of projects in line with government and governance expectations and requirements. You know, obviously we need to demonstrate value for money, but we also need to put it in a local context, harness knowledge, etc., and technical skills, which we have done in the previous groups, which is bringing those together. We want the group to be representative of our communities, and to embrace all the council's kind of priorities in terms of climate change, poverty and truth, making sure that people, you know, are not disadvantaged, that we bring equality further up the agenda as well on those aspects. And so we want the group to be representative of our communities and to aim to be inclusive and diverse, at the same time being representative of our neighbourhoods and geographies. So a bit further on page oh, I've got to put 2, sorry, apologies, under the end of section 3. So we're saying that we're helping to translate the visions being developed for the borough, that will, where appropriate, will act as a sounding board for the development of such visions that we bring forward, help prioritise any of the activities and opportunities that we bring forward. And as Rose said, it's, you know, it's not just about schemes, it is about initiatives as well as activities and opportunities, and want the group to act as a bit of a reference group for our plans as well and proposals. So again, a bit of a feedback mechanism as well for anything that we're putting forward. In section 4, in terms of the outline of the group, you know, we're suggesting that at the moment the meetings will be virtual at a quarterly frequency, and that we'll have these subgroups on geographies, and we've suggested 3 at this point in time, and there presumably will be some comments on that as well, I suspect, going forward. So we've arrived at the 3 principal political boundaries of transport influence, you know, and that historically from government funding, we're probably focused on more initiatives. Well, we're bound by government initiatives really in terms of where the spend could be made, but that's not to say where all our opportunities lie. We want the group to be made up of council officers and members of the community, and we want you know, we want to harness the strengths of the group going forward, to bring discussion and cohesion to the groups and the initiatives we're putting forward. From a secretariat point of view, we'll obviously provide the notes and we'll put them on the internet, and we will record the meeting to make available for those that can't be here. In terms of membership, we have made a suggestion in section 5 for the membership, and we've invited an awful lot of people here today, but we wanted to make sure that you were aware of our plans and to know when and where your advice and expertise may be harnessed when that's most appropriate to do so. So we've put a suggested list together of representatives, and we've had some comments since putting these terms of reference out. So I think that's also up for discussion in a minute. On the final point, timescales and timing. So obviously we've had the inaugural meeting today. We're presenting the terms of reference in draft form. We fully expect that there'll be some comments and adjustments as we go forward. We've suggested that the meetings are in the daytime. Obviously, we've had some comments on that as well. Some of the comments we got when we were looking to merge the strengths of the group was that people couldn't always attend in the evenings. And so do we need to look at a different mix, whether it's, you know, on rotation during the day and one, the next one in the evening sort of thing. So that's up for discussion. And we would just ask that each representative is able to make decisions on behalf of the group that they're representing in terms of engagement. Obviously, involvement in the group doesn't preclude you from having any other consultative, that's not easy for me to say, is it? Any other input into our consultation process, should I say? That would be easier for me. And so that doesn't preclude you from undertaking, general responses to the council. We've put together some potential themes. We may have missed some. They're covered under section 8. So at the moment we've got the local transport plan that will be key to our transport aspirations going forward. Clearly, as Rose said, we're waiting further guidance on that, but that needs to bring in, the whole climate change agenda, the bus service improvement plan, and other bits and bobs that are coming forward, and it might be more of a bidding document. So we really need to make sure we get that right and not rush it through, but do it effectively and well. Obviously, active modes, because that's key to the previous active travel forum. Bus and bus-based modes, obviously park and ride in Chester, but also bus affecting everyone in the borough really, or all communities in the borough. Rail, I think that was mentioned before about being slightly overlooked, but the integrated rail plan and making sure we've got connectivity between bus and rail and other modes. As Garfield said, freight, transport hubs, obviously we've discussed, and obviously making sure that we embed placemaking and wider regeneration within our activities. Any future transport activity options, electric and hydrogen, and our EV strategy supporting that. Supporting infrastructure, ticketing and or technology. There's elements of bus within that as well, but obviously it's not just limited to that. And then sort of the other matters. So I mentioned climate change, air quality, equality, poverty, and making sure that we fully align with the council's own policies as well. And potentially going forward, policy reform and integration would, use yourselves as a sounding board for that. And behavioural change and mode shift at the bottom of the list, but I would say by no means that'll be where it'll sit. So that's kind of a quick kind of canter through, and apologies, it has been very rapid, but I think there's probably questions and queries and comments to be made as well. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks for that really comprehensive introduction, Christy. It was really helpful. Okay, I'm going to invite Andy Farrell first for the first comments.
Hi, Andy Farrell, Bid and the Growth Partnership from Chester. Welcome the terms of reference. I think the Bid and the Growth Partnership would see some modifications really. There is a danger that we carry on in the kind of same old transport bubble that we've been in the past really. There is a mention in the terms of reference, there's one line about placemaking and regeneration, which is right. But then the rest of the terms of reference don't follow that one up really. Particularly when you get to the place geographies. There is an Ellesmere Port Growth Board. There is a Chester Growth Partnership. And the Chester Growth Partnership's developing its review of the One City Plan. And that's why it's called the One City Plan. It's supposed to have everything in it, including transport. So I'm just worried and a little disappointed to a degree, but worried that we're not taking advantage of some of the other structures and working groups to feed the kind of transport agenda too. So therefore, we're not just integrating the transport agenda, we're integrating the agenda, actually, because we don't do transport for transport's sake, we do transport for other reasons, to get to a place, or for regeneration, or for economic growth. So it would be good to integrate our transportation agenda and the work of this partnership and link it and integrate it with the current regeneration and economic development structures, actually. The growth partnership would see that and would welcome that in Chester. And I'm sure the Ellesmere Port one would. And I know there's one that covers Winsford. So it could be the geography structures are already there. You just need to feed this agenda and this group into it. And I think that would work really well. The other issue, I think, is, and again, we fall into this trap, I've fallen into this trap before, is that we structure a program and a bit of work based upon the government's agenda and the government's funding programs. And that's death, basically, isn't it? One, because they may change the programs, but two, we're never going to be a priority, are we? We're not Manchester or Liverpool. So therefore, why don't we develop our own vision and search for money to deliver that vision, of which some of it would be government money. So it's a mix and match. And much of it will be done, I guess, outside the government money. So I wouldn't be concerned if we deliver the government's agenda at all. We should be delivering what our agenda is, actually. The other key thing to reinforce, I think, is actually communications in what we do. That's one thing we should have learned out of the active travel lane, bus lane debates we had, and integrating kind of the work on digital technologies in this, because lots of the smart stuff we'll be looking at will be app driven, not traditional infrastructure driven. And I guess that's about actually just changing some of the skills and some of the know-how and some of the expertise of us and the transportation teams in the council, I suspect. So I think there's some changes required to bring it into, I think, probably an agenda which is more about the future than the more traditional transportation agendas, dare I say.
Okay, thanks, Andy. And I know we are working closely with Regeneration, and from, Councillor Beecham has been very heavily involved in that, and most things we work on together, and that includes the officer to officer teams as well. But I take the point you're making about placemaking, about the development boards, I believe they're called now, rather than, I think that's the new iteration of them, and their involvement. Don't know if Rose has got anything to add. I actually wonder whether it'd be worth taking comments in groups of 2 or 3, because I'm just conscious of time, and then maybe we can follow up thereafter. Okay, thank you. We've got Crag. I'm not sure if it's Tony or John or Vanessa.
Time.
And just say it again, John.
Pardon?
You have to. I've clicked you on now.
Oh, okay then. So just for those on the call who are not familiar with CRAG, CRAG is the Chester Residents Associations group. We have about 26 RAs as members of CRAG, and therefore we represent something like 4,000 to 5,000 households within the city of Chester and its environs. So we're a jolly good database set. We've also got quite a lot of expertise, perhaps in a lay terms, but nevertheless there. And I think that CRAG could offer a very considerable input to a member of the core group of this body, because we've been talking about behavioural change, attitudes. Well, we've got a huge cohort of people who could evaluate what was going to be necessary for behavioural change, communications, and attitudes. So there's an offer from CRAG to this body. Insofar as the terms of reference, don't want to really go into any specific detail, but really, where is the philosophy? The philosophy seems to CRAG that the terms of reference are about input. the whole objective of this body is to get output. So where are going to be the deliveries? Who's going to be responsible for delivery? Who's going to drive delivery? And I think that's a very, key issue, that if we're going to do anything, we've got to have deliverable, measurable outputs. So certainly we'd like to support the terms of reference, but we'd perhaps like to see it somewhat more reflective of a objective for delivery. And just on one specific point, my background is electricity utilities running networks, both here in Manweb many years ago and elsewhere. We talk about electrification of transport. Have we really seriously thought about the impact on the local distribution network? And what I would suggest is that we do engage with the local distribution network operator, because there are stress points on the network where they might look askance if you start to want to require large-scale electrification. There'll be other parts of the network which is pretty lightly loaded, and they would be welcoming you with open arms to get more interconnection and load. So basically, from a CRAGS perspective, we would like to play our part as a member of the core group and offer the cohort of people who we as the executive of CRAG represent.
Thank you very much. That's really helpful. I'm going to bring Stephen Perry in and then Garfield.
Thanks again, and thanks for the terms of reference and the opportunity to comment. I fully endorse what John's just said about the need, whether it's in the terms of reference, but certainly the whole spirit should be focused a little bit more on output. I've got a number of comments I'll probably just put in the email, but I'd just like to one in particular. Reading sections 2 and 3, Rose and others, I do feel, and I'm not objecting to this at all, but I do feel that although we talk about co-development and working together and reviewing, that the feeling is the initiative comes from the local authority, and then we as a group review and develop that. And we're not, contrary to what we do in the Sustainable Transport Task Force, we're not asking communities to come up with their own ideas. My question is that intentional? I don't object to that, because I think in many ways we need to rationalise what we're doing and manage expectations accordingly. But if it is there, I just like to make it explicit. The second point, again, it's been touched on slightly. I think under the heading engagement, we need to think about ways of learning to work better together. I think as excited volunteers, we tend to underestimate the demands that officers have on their time, and to receive emails requesting stuff is probably just another nuisance, really. But the intention is always positive. So whether we talk about how we work together, how we play together, how we communicate together, and I think communication could be much more open with regular updates on websites and things. I think there's a whole package on engagement that isn't yet covered and needs to be developed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that's a really important point around engagement. We'll just take Garfield's comments and then we'll pick up a few of the points that have been raised, if that's okay. Garfield.
Okay. Yep, thanks, Councillor. Thanks. Thanks everybody. I mean, the comments that are coming in are so astute and spot on. And Stephen, I'm not going to go through it individually because you've said them all, but I do support them. I think one of the things it's interesting about the structure in point 4 is the fact that the timescale is quarterly, which means that we probably only get 4 meetings like this a year. And yet we are going to be looking at areas of further work which will be on a more frequent basis. And I think that point needs to come out. I think it's fine in the TR, but we need to make that point more clearly, because a lot of the work that we will be doing will be in those groups. And that's where we will be seeking the expertise and moving the directions forward that we're saying, and thus the output that's been requested at, earlier on. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that point, really.
Sorry, thanks, Garfield. Rose, do you want to come back in and?
Yeah, I've been reading the chat and I've been taking it all in, scribbling enormous numbers of notes here as well. it's the healthiest discussion that we could have hoped for on this call. So I'm really grateful for everything that everyone's putting in. I tell you what, there's the level of nervousness that there is sort of within the local authority to actually have ambition but deliverability is really tense. There's tension there of you. Well, you don't know me, but you'll get to know me, and you'll know that my ambition is absolutely limitless, and I know what we're capable of, and I know where we can get to, and I know what we can do as a team. And it's really asphyxiating almost, because there's so much to go at, because we're here and we can be here, and this journey is just the most exciting one ever to bring us to that brilliant point over there. But what then I have to take back is actually what officer time, what is the deliverability of this? And I think, in the past, where we might have fallen down is actually by not managing expectations and not actually saying, look, this is what's possible. This is the art of the possible. So having that ambition and channeling it in exactly the right way into the schemes that will give us most sort of bang for buck, so to speak, in terms of behaviour change and net zero positioning and congestion relief and journey time reliability and active travel, and all of those nested benefits that come through what we do from a transport perspective. So there is a level of nervousness that I think Christy and myself and others need to kind of go away and kind of work out what the appetite for risk is, and what our working experience needs to be, and what resource we can bring in, and where can we look revenue funding to actually support that deliverability within the local authority, because that's at the end of the day, that's where it's going to end up, that's where it's going to come back to, without turning everyone on this call off and thinking, oh, well, nothing that we suggest is ever going to happen. You've got all this great ambition, enthusiasm and brilliant ideas and expertise, and you're just listening to us and nodding and saying, yeah, and then going back to, putting another challenge fund in or whatever. I'm not going to read the comments in the chat as I'm talking, because I'm sure they're very important, but I just need to keep focused on coming back to some of the points that were made. So there is that nervousness and that tension between the art of the possible, but we need to reflect on that. And at the moment, we're going through a redesign of both the highways and the transport structures to actually get it fit for purpose, and have those principles of looking for. It's called decide and provide as opposed to predict and provide. So you look forward and you backcast and you say, where do we want to be by 2050, and backcast from there, instead of looking backwards and saying, where have we been and where do we need to get to? So moving away from that traditional standpoint. I think the terms of reference, you're quite right, need to focus more on outputs, and that point of philosophy that you made, Tony, or John, sorry, from a CRAG perspective, that philosophy, I think that's got to be in there as well. So I'll take the terms of reference away with Christy and reflect on the points that were made by all of those questions that then came in. And that focus on output, but I think I just need your support within this group into making sure that we are data led, we are evidence based, and what we do will make an impact instead of spreading ourselves too thinly. And doing brilliant basics. There's a really important point here to make. We need to do the basics brilliantly, and then build on that and build on that and build on that, which we can do and will do as a group. And I don't know whether, Christy, you've got anything to sort of come back on from a terms of reference perspective, or anything specifically from what we've had those in those last couple of questions.
Rose, can I just add a point there? Totally agree with everything that you've said, but the question raised about alternative sources of funding is a very interesting one. And historically, we've had people employed in the council specifically just to do that job. Those days are gone now, but that doesn't mean we can't be ambitious in looking for community funding, grassroots funding from private companies. Every project these days that the council has to bring forward has an element of several different sources of funding, and that's really the way forward. So it might be helpful for, I don't know whether it's appropriate to put in the terms of reference, but to just consider, looking outside of the parameters of what we receive in terms of grants or additional funding streams from government. But that's a conversation to be continued, I think. And again, I won't repeat the points that have been made already, but I think we hear them loud and clearly about having a vision, about measuring outputs, and about ambition. So that's it's really, really, really welcomed. I've got 4 people with their hands up now, and I'd like to give them an opportunity, and that's Bernadette Bailey. First of all.
Hello, thank you everyone. I'm Bernadette Bailey. I work for NHS Cheshire Clinical Commissioning Group. So we're responsible as an organisation for commissioning the health services for the population of Cheshire West and Chester area, as well as the rest of Cheshire. I was a member of the Sustainable Transport Task Force, and I found it a fascinating group to be part of. I have to say I don't live in the geographical area, and I live in Cheshire East, but actually to see the engagement and passion and commitment and some of the conversations I had with individual members of some of the active groups was fabulous. And I think harnessing that in what we go forwards in a real co-productive way can pay great dividends. I think we do have the challenge of how we marry that against the responsibilities of the council and the aspirations of the community, but I'm sure we can find a way through that. Clearly, where I'm coming from is really about our health and well-being, and just a couple of facts to share with you. In 2021, 4 million people died worldwide of COVID, and 7 million died of air pollution. In the UK, air pollution kills more people than smoking. And if we could address some of the issues in air pollution, we could save 36,000 deaths every single year across the UK. So there's lots of opportunities for us here to do the right thing for us to live our lives well, to get to where we need to, but the spin-off. And I'd like to see, I know it's in there, but a little more emphasis on the health and well-being, which actually helps us all, but also saves organisations like mine and the council money on the delivery of its care. So there's win-wins in all of this. The final thing I wanted to say is I think communities are key to this. We live in communities. The behavioural change and the lifestyle changes will come from communities. We now organise our health services in communities, our social care in communities. And so we've got some infrastructure there in some of our other parts of our business, aligned with some of the things we're talking about here, residents associations and all the active groups. And I think it does give us a real opportunity to do things in a different way. That can deliver a different outcome for all of us, really, for our health and our well-being. So I think I support all the points that have been made, but I totally acknowledge and recognise the challenge of achieving it. So, but thank you.
Thanks, Bernadette, and I think we all echo what you're saying about health and well-being, and I think it's a very poignant point you made about COVID figures in particular versus the air pollution deaths in the world. So thank you. I'm going to bring Donna in.
Thank you. And thank you very much. I'm Donna Oakle. I'm a parish councillor for Willington Parish Council, a small rural village, and a founder of Cheshire for Good, which is intended to support businesses to better understand and improve their impact. And I think there's a couple of things really that are missing for me, and that's how we are serving as a group, underrepresented and underserved groups. I'm thinking particularly of the disabled community. And if you look at what I can see on my screen, it's not a wonderful example of diversity and inclusion. And I think often that's because we're all interested, we're doing stuff in this space, and those harder to reach people who really need our help aren't necessarily represented on these groups. So I guess the question there is, how do the terms of reference address that? Also, just to endorse so much of what's been said, and particularly Bernadette, that, you know, unless we address the impact of climate change, we're a goner, and we're a goner far quicker than most of us appreciate. And we're looking at 8 years here. So I think the frustration as we hear Greta talking about blah, 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 I sense the frustration, and Rose, I sense the tension between what's possible and what's needed. And I think it's the what's needed that we have to focus on, and that is a prioritisation exercise, isn't it? And collaboration, using local resource. You know, you look at particularly the rural communities, which are generally underserved. I know the current plans for the rural transport exclude our community by a tiny margin, but people are moving out of the village because they want to create a cleaner, greener, fairer future and can't, so they've got to move. So harnessing the power of local communities, whether they be in towns like Crag, and cities, or whether they be in rural local villages, the power of those local communities is often underestimated, I think, and I'm keen to help from a funding and a resource perspective. But I don't envy you, Rose, and the team. I don't think it's an easy task, but I think, you know, the focus has got to be on what we can do to mitigate the impact of climate change, because the rest of the stuff is kind of blah, blah, blah. If we don't do that and quickly and at scale, we're stuffed.
Yeah.
Thanks, Donna.
Thank you.
Kathy Harrington.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Kathy Harrington. I'm from Chester Cycling Campaign and 20's Plenty for Chester. And first of all, I'd just like to say thank you so much. This is very refreshing and it's very positive. So well done so far. We're off to a good start. I have two small points to make about the terms of reference. One partly to echo Donna's, which was, how are people with mobility issues to be represented? Are they going to be represented by the groups who are already there? And therefore, will they have a role in representing people with mobility issues? Because I think we all know that we talk a lot about walking and cycling, but obviously that's not realistic for lots of people. And it's those people that we really have to take care of, and we have to make sure that they have equal access to everybody else. So how are they going to be represented? And my second point is about communicating the output of the group. And again, I think this has probably been mentioned previously, but I think it's perhaps fair to say that the Sustainable Transport Task Force had ambitions to communicate widely, but they were very low key in the end. And a good example of communication from the council is the Participate Now output. You've got a dashboard there, and that's very good. So something akin to that, but with also kind of outreach with local radio stations, parish council involvement, really putting out that message would be, I think, very good. So the message really, really is pushed out into the community rather than just sitting there for people to come and look at. Thank you, folks.
Thanks very much, Kathy. And I think communication is part of what we want to consider as well. And I think there's some really good links with some of the tools you already have, but also that we can strengthen with Insight and Intelligence and the work that they're doing on Participate Now and other platforms. Okay, I'm going to bring Roy Newton in, and then we have Eileen Morgan. Now, I have to be my last speaker because we've just overrun slightly. Roy.
Brilliant. Thanks, Karen. Hello, everyone. I'm Roy Newton. I'm the Transport and Investment Director at Cheshire and Warrington Local Enterprise Partnership. I think it's been a great discussion this afternoon.
Roy, sorry, can I ask you to put your camera on, just talking about equality and inclusion, just in case.
I have put my camera on.
Oh,
so
right.
I'm not sure why it's not working. Let me turn it off and try again.
Okay.
Has that helped? Right, I'll tell you what, I'll just leave and come back in.
No, Roy, sorry, it's Christy. I think it's if maybe I turn my camera off and maybe a few others that aren't speaking, then you might appear.
I can see Roy.
Yeah,
I can see you now, Roy.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Don't you just love technology? Oh, a few people are freezing. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, you're all good.
Yeah.
Roy, yeah.
Fantastic. And can everyone see me as well? Brilliant. Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to say it's been, from my perspective, this has been a really, really good session because there's a lot of good ideas, a lot of good suggestions coming forward. And there's obviously a lot of expertise, knowledge, enthusiasm, and passion for supporting delivery of integrated sustainable transport, which is great. A couple of thoughts. Where I think that, and maybe it's a strapline for the group, just my suggestion, but I think where the group can really help out is by helping the council make better policy, strategy, programmes and schemes. And effectively that, for me, that's our role, our remit to help the council deliver those better outcomes, and if we think about the cycle schemes, actually help deliver schemes that are publicly acceptable and deliverable. So that's just a thought for the terms of reference. Picking up Rose's point about obviously there's got to be art of the possible. There are finite resources. I think one of the key things in the short term is going to be about that prioritisation and where the council best focuses its resources in order to deliver. And then picking up Andy Farrell's point, I think a key part of that is actually it's not transport priorities. It's what are the wider council priorities. So decarbonisation, spatial priorities, what's trying to be attempted in terms of regeneration. And those sorts of priorities are the things that should focus and drive the transport priorities in the shorter term. So that's just a couple of thoughts from me to throw into the mix.
Thanks, Roy. And just in case people didn't catch it, did you say your role on the LEP and what
yes,
it was?
so I'm the Transport and Investment Director at Cheshire and Warrington LEP.
Local Enterprise Partnership. Just in
Indeed,
case people
yes.
don't know what the acronym is.
I actually said Local Enterprise Partnership the first time. So
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you. Beg your pardon. Okay. Thanks,
Yeah.
Roy. Eileen Morgan, can I bring you in, please?
Yes, thank you. My name's Eileen Morgan. I'm involved with the Chester cycling campaign as the Inclusive Cycling Officer. I have a disability myself. I use my electric cycle as my mobility aid, and I've also more recently started to get more involved with active travel with regards using wheeled mobility aids. It's something that I think is sadly missing when we look at some of the terms of reference, that wheeling isn't in there. And I've been campaigning really towards having the words walking and wheeling, so that we've got cycling, walking and wheeling as our header, because we're missing out on those people who do have mobility difficulties, can't walk very far and need to use wheels to be active. That might be the type of roller that you see some people using, or it might be the type of active wheelchair that I use, which has levers that I can move backwards and forwards. So it's giving me an upper body workout when I use it. It enables me to go to the country park and to go to places that I can't access in a standard wheelchair. We see that we've got mobility aid shops for shoppers where we have scooters, but they're only suitable for indoor use and for smooth pavements. So you have to consider people with disabilities just the same as anybody else. Like you have walking shoes and gym shoes and other types of shoes to do your activities. We need different types of wheels to enable us to be active. And that's something that, you know, I'm really strongly advocating that we start to use the word wheeling as well. It is something that I've talked to the London groups about as well, who are very forceful on the side of disability and activity. And they are now using walking and wheeling in their terminology when they talk about active travel. So maybe it's something that you can think about with regard to your terms of reference, and you know, I could talk further about it and how I'm trying to advocate that. I have just taken part in a crowdfunding scheme with the council backing, and it is something that I'm going to be promoting a lot further in the new year when the funding comes through and so on, to have more hired equipment available to enable people to be active wheelers.
Is that the Space Hive
Yes,
platform?
and I've been successful in getting my 100% funding. So that's something in the new year I'm going to be having the first hired active wheel chair available for people to go around the country park and other places. So yes, it's something I'm working hard at. But I want other types of aids as well. There's lots of things. Some people can only use their arms to, you know, move in this direction. So they need like a crank type thing on a trike or a wheelchair to move. And for instance, and my situation is that I can't wheel a chair with a downward movement, but I can move levers. So it makes activity available to me.
Eileen, congratulations. Yeah, congratulations on that. It's amazing to have you as part of this group, and we'd like to work with you very closely going forward to ensure that we do represent fully, you know, all of the people that we have within Cheshire West and Chester with all mobility needs. So I'm really, really happy you're here and that you've given us that insight as well. Thanks, Eileen.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Eileen. And I think, you know, we can have, it's a conversation we can have offline to some extent, but the Space Hive does present other opportunities for smaller projects like that, which is a new, it's a public-private sector partnership of crowdsource funding, which the council has sort of recently got set up. Okay, I am conscious of time and we have overrun, and I'm mindful that we need to look at items 4 and 5, which is the programme of meetings and the work programme. Rose, I don't know what your thoughts are. I'm actually thinking we probably need to have another shortish meeting to go come back and look at the terms of reference again.
Yeah, I quite agree. I think we were overly ambitious having all of what we had on the agenda today, but we just hoped that you could see our willingness and our ambition to really, you know, get all of this sort of covered and get your involvement in. But I think, Karen, we've probably been overly ambitious and not really put a manageable amount on the agenda. So if people are okay, we can, as the Secretariat, make sure that we set up a smaller meeting to cover off those last 2 points, or have a longer session on the terms of reference specifically. I know that we can capture all of the comments from the chat that have been entered today. So if there are specific questions in there that you've raised, we'll endeavour to get back to you, to the person who raised those questions on the chat, if you haven't had that question answered, if there was a specific one. And maybe if you actually had specific comments on the terms of reference, you might want to just email those to us so that we can update the document accordingly. But I've been making some quite specific notes about the suggestions people have made. I don't know whether that sounds okay with you, Karen.
Absolutely. And so are we in agreement that we're going to just schedule another meeting in quite short order then? Yeah, okay. Right, in that case then, is there any other business? Item 6.
Councillor Shaw, sorry, I'll just put the transport strategy email address in the chat, so any comments that come forward on the terms of reference or anything we can capture in a central place, if that's helpful for everyone. I'll do that now.
Okay. But there is the transcript of the chat as well, isn't there, which people can add to even after the meeting's closed if they wish.
And I think, Councillor Shaw, there's been quite a few comments about sort of the timing for the meeting. And I know Stephen Hughes has just put back in the chat then about day and mix for evening. The reason we went for daytime was the ATF actually fed back to us that people with caring responsibilities or young children, for example, really struggled with that 6 to 8 things. So trying to make this as inclusive as possible for the diverse mix of people that we want on the group. But I think what we need to do then is do either or, you know, so daytime one evening, daytime evening, and then we're making sure we've got the right approach if you're comfortable with that, and if people across the group think that's a good happy medium.
Yeah, and I've had one email today from somebody who didn't receive the invite, who I know would be a very valued addition. So there might, you know, we might be still tweaking the membership list slightly as well. So we're still open to suggestions there, if I can add that too. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you everyone for your attendance, and we take the action away. We'll be in touch. The Secretariat will be in touch very shortly to diarise another meeting. I just wonder before we leave if Garfield has any closing comments that he would like to make, if he's still with us.
I am indeed, yes.
You are.
Thanks, Chair. No, I have no closing comments. I think everybody said everything and said it far better than I could. There's so many really good points coming out today, and I'm just grateful for everybody's contribution. So thank you, everyone. Well done.
Thank you, everybody, too, for, from myself and from the officer team at Cheshire West and Chester for your input and your really valuable suggestions, really, because, you know, it's the sum of all the parts, isn't it, that makes us work better together and get better outcomes for people. So we look forward to seeing you again very soon, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Hi, I don't know if everyone's still on the meeting. I'm going to have to eject you from the meeting, sorry, so I can close down the recording and get it saved. So apologies for that if you're still there. I'll speak to you soon. Thank you.